Good morning. I'm Sanjay Reddy. I'm chairing this morning's session. Welcome to the second day of the International Conference on the Environment in India and China, Histories and Innovations at the New School, which we're very proud and pleased to be able to host. The conference is very much the work of our fellows who will also be speaking in this afternoon's panel. But this morning we have an extremely distinguished group of historians and environmental historians who are going to talk about their perspective on the environmental histories of the two countries, and I hope, or we hope also, the relevance of these histories to contemporary debates. Before going further, and while we wait for our panelists to all arrive and seat themselves, I'd like to call on Alison Schuttinger, who is the timekeeper for today. So please, panelists, blame her when she tells you she's going to be sitting in the front row that you don't have any time left. And you can blame me too, but secondarily. But Alison has a more important announcement to make, or a very important announcement to make about other matters.
Hi, how are you? Just a brief announcement. All of the food and the products, the utensils, are biodegradable, and they can be disposed of in the two compost bins, one which is right beside the food, I believe, or no one's moved. One which is right beside the trash can in the recycling bin. It has a top cover that is black and labeled compost, and there's also one directly behind you all along the white wall next to the recycling bin, also with a black cover labeled compost. So in line with the topic and the theme of today, I think it's important that we definitely dispose of our organic waste properly. Thank you.
I'm not going to introduce the panelists in detail, although they deserve to be introduced in detail because they are indeed all extremely distinguished. But I do refer you to the biographical notes at the back of your program where you can find out more about each of them. And so in brief, I will just call on each of them, who will speak for about 20 minutes. And there will, of course, be plenty of time for discussion as well. The discussants, I believe, have 10 minutes afterwards, after the main presenters. So first, I'd like to call on Professor Ranjan Chakrabarty, who is the Vice Chancellor of Vidyasagar University, who will be speaking on writing the environmental history of Asia.
Good morning, Dr. Reddy, Mr. Chairman, sir, distinguished scholars, researchers, students, ladies and gentlemen. A very good morning to all of you. At the outset, I take this opportunity to express my sense of gratitude to the India-China Institute for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to speak before you this morning. My special thanks to Dr. Ashok Gurung and Professor Jayanta Bandyopadhyay for contacting me for this conference. So, without wasting any more time, I'd like to go to the discussion. Because of time constraint, I would prefer to read from a prepared text. I would request the timekeeper to please wave your hand when I complete 17 minutes, so I have 3 minutes more. And my time begins, I understand, from now on. This presentation is divided into 3 broad sections. There is a brief introductory section which harps upon certain general questions and recent trends regarding the history and historiography of Asian environmental history, while the second section focuses on a more specific environmental issue, namely climate and water. And the final section seeks to unveil how the age-old concern for water in South Asia has always been intimately tied up with a remarkable cultural consciousness about climate and change of climate. On the whole, the purpose of this presentation is to harp upon the need to open up a new debate as to the historical linkage between the concern for water and the concern for climate in South Asia and East Asia, and draw some attention to a hitherto neglected field of research. This is part of a broader project funded by the Government of India and UNESCO Paris, and I have published a part of it in this last edited volume, co-edited volume by Springer. You can take a look later on in the Springer website. But this research is at a very unfinished stage, so my sincere apologies. The annual meeting of the American Historical Association, scheduled in Cleveland, Ohio, for the end of December 1918, never took place. It was canceled, according to the next issue of the American Historical Review, because of the epidemic of influenza. In the last 4 decades of 1918, the Spanish flu, or the epidemic of influenza, killed more than 3,000 people in the city of Cleveland alone, nearly 20,000 in the state of Ohio, and it killed 500,000 people in the whole of the United States, and about 20 million people in the world. But the members of the American Historical Association, as historians, remained indifferent to the subject of health, medicine, or epidemics. Not a single publication featured in the American Historical Review in the next 50 years. This is something very amazing. But same is the case here in Asian history. Let me cite a concrete example from South Asian history. We hear so much about the history of the growth of the city of Kolkata, or the political forces leading to the Battle of Plassey or Boxer. But there seems to be so little information about the natural setting, landscape, waterscape, or the climate, in the midst of which all these had been taking place. There is some historical silence about the natural setting, and historians who dealt with the political forces leading to the Battle of Plassey, like Rajat Kanta Rai and Sushil Chaudhary, are remarkably and surprisingly silent about the natural environment. Thanks to Alfred Crosby's The Columbian Exchange and the subsequent efforts of John McNeill, Donald Wooster, and Donald Hughes, and many others, for opening up this field of environmental history. Professional historians may have been indifferent to environmental issues earlier, but concern for environment in human society has always been there. Of all the decisions human society takes, perhaps the most crucial ones have always been related to the natural world. One of the flashpoints in the inner conflicts within the human societies of the past was fueled by the continuous effort to resolve the question of the legitimate use of the natural world. As human settlements spread across the earth and technology advanced, the urge to resolve this fundamental question relating to the legitimate use of the natural world increased. Writers, philosophers, historians, lawmakers, administrators, and thinkers through the ages had been wrestling to settle this unresolved question. The method of addressing this crucial question has attained a refinement over the last 2 decades or so, and one important manifestation of this turn can be found in the rise of a new field of knowledge, namely environmental history. In the writing of Asian history, interactions between people and their environment have long been central to studies of Asia's agrarian economy, with their focus on land use, irrigation, and other implicitly environmental issues. South Asian environmental history, which focuses more on the Indian subcontinent in particular, has been increasingly acknowledged by the non-South Asian environmental historians in recent years as one of the most developed. The robustness of South Asian environmental history may be attributed to the efforts of scholars like Richard Tucker, Ramchandra Guha, Madhav Gadgil, Richard Grove, and many others. Basically, the core component of this historiography is forest history, though issues like irrigation, water management, public health, and epidemics also feature. It sees the coming of colonialism as an environmental watershed and its legacy as the key agent. Chinese or East Asian environmental history, too, has turned into a dynamic and fast-expanding field. The new frontier of environmental history of East Asia, or China, has been successfully opened up by scholars like Peter Perdue, Robert B. Marks, Mark Elvin, and Sui Zhang Liu, Feng Xiang Liang, John F. Richards, and Mark Elvin. Mark Elvin's work is a 4,000-year overview of Chinese environmental history. During this time, Chinese deforestation gradually pushed elephants, once found roaming the vicinity of the city of Beijing, until they occupied only a few small areas in Burma and northeastern India. Elephants do not play a central role in Elvin's book. It is far from a history of the elephants. The elephants stand as the reverse image in space and time of that of the economic development and environmental transformation of pre-modern China. Nation-state-centric, region-centric, or continent-centric narratives in environmental history may not be of great help. In environmental history, all local issues are global issues, and all global issues are local issues. This is, however, not to say that local or regional studies are unnecessary or insignificant, and environmental histories have to be invariably transnational in scope. Now I move to the second part of the presentation, where I deal with South Asia and the water crisis. Now, in South Asia, control over water has always been traditionally a sign of social and political power. And it is one of the most densely populated zones of the world, as you all know. At the same time, it is also one of the most water-rich areas of the world. And people here have a profound understanding of the value of water. And it is a very worrisome challenge, the problem of water management in this area. It is a very challenging job, and the whole of Asia, and South Asia in particular, is experiencing problem in managing its water resource. Now, water, as you know, as all of you know, is a unique resource, and it appears in different forms, and it is a process in the biological cycle, physical and biological cycle. And it's known for its changeability, and it's celebrated for shifting its form and taking new forms. And it plays an extraordinary role in social and cultural representations as well. And these values and norms, the cultural values, norms, are reflected in the ways water is perceived, used, governed, and treated. Water is commonly seen only as a part of the physical environment and of biology, and is studied by tracking the pathways of the hydrological cycle and its role in biology. Water history enhances our understanding about the nexus between the human and physical worlds within specific temporal and spatial settings. Water is always a symbol of social, economic, and political relationships, a barometer of the extent to which identity, power, and resources are shared. The current environmental agenda, including the question associated with climate change, are related to the question of sustainable management of water. Concern for water has always been there in the human societies of the past. One of the earliest, if not the earliest, textually documented war was fought between the Mesopotamian city-states of Lagash and Umma over a canal and its associated irrigated fields. Groundwater levels are falling throughout northern China. In India, it's falling 1 to 3 meters every year. In the United States, water levels are falling throughout the south-southwest. With 1,000 tons of water required to produce 1 ton of grain, food scarcity is closely tied to water scarcity. China is facing an acute water shortage in recent times. Since 2009, the news relating to the ongoing construction of Chinese dams in Brahmaputra is featuring markedly in both print and television media. Most of the reports mentioned that China is planning to sort out its water crisis by diverting some Brahmaputra water towards eastern region. River Brahmaputra is very important for both India and Bangladesh. This cross-border water resource issue may escalate into a low high-intensity conflict involving China, India, and Pakistan in the long run. For northeastern India and Bangladesh, the river is vital as it provides for sweet water and the annual gift of the fertile silt for farming. Agriculture in this part of the world is still heavily dependent on the traditional overflow irrigation. So you understand the importance of Brahmaputra water. Yet water, be it manipulated by human agency or not, is not necessarily beneficial. Large flooding can be very disruptive, as the Asian tsunami and the flooding of New Orleans have proved once more, and the recent Hurricane Sandy. Hurricane Katrina has 2 almost equally sizable predecessors, the Mississippi floods of 1927 and 1937, events that feature prominently in American history and in important works in the written history of the global environment. Again, the east coast of India are particularly exposed to severe tropical cyclonic storms that bring high tidal waves and floods in the Indian and Bangladesh Sundarbans. Instances of water as calamity in history can be multiplied. Humans attribute a variety of meanings to water. Water is important for religious rituals. And the combination of material, cultural, and religious uses and meanings of water has shaped water systems and has emphasized the intrinsic proximity and hybridity of the non-human and the human world. In addition to its physical properties, the movement of water through the larger hydrological cycle and through that the global energy cycle as well adds a unique chronological element. Water in its different forms is in steady motion through time and space. It evaporates from the oceans, falls to the ground, is absorbed into the soil, or stored in frozen ice caps, and eventually returns to the ocean. The time scale for each droplet of water can differ greatly. Groundwater can be thousands of years old. The water we use today, most likely has come into contact with the humans or non-humans before. At the beginning of the 20th century, a major chunk of scientists believed that climate of the world had been essentially constant over at least 5,000 years. In the next 100 years, this assumption fell through. A number of historians, notably Braudel and Ladourie, showed some willingness to pay serious attention to the possible effects of climatic change in historical situations. Like any valuable assets, the global water cycle delivers a steady stream of benefits to society. Rivers, lakes, and other freshwater ecosystems work in concert with forest, grassland, and other landscapes to provide goods and services of great importance to human society. In South Asia, I'm going to the concluding section, which deals exclusively with South Asia. In South Asia, water is at the heart of politics between nations. As they increasingly face the challenge of meeting the growing needs of their populations. Within nations, the disputes and conflicts over the control of flowing waters are evidence of the growing need for water. David Moss, in one of the very significant contributions to history of environment, showed the fundamental importance of systems of water control to Tamil social and cultural life. Until Moss, the focus was primarily on irrigation and its economic importance. It is high time to open up the frontier of a hybrid history of water and society. This will be a turning away from the dominant model of the economic history of irrigation towards a new kind of ethno-history or socio-cultural history of water. Rivers and water resources have been central to the prosperity and survival of the human civilization in South Asia. Environmental science has established that water has a very complex relationship with soils, plants, and human needs. Modern water management in capitalistic economics looks upon water as a stock to be tapped. Such an approach to water resource management that views water as stock and not as a flow in the water cycle generates a misconception that through large-made, man-made structures, water resources can be augmented. But water cannot be produced. Water resources cannot be created. It can be stored, diverted, used, polluted, but its overall availability cannot be enhanced. The 6 warmest years, as you are all aware, since record keeping began in 1880, have come in the last 8 years. 3 of these 6, 2002, 2003, 2005, were years in which major food-producing regions saw their crops going down in the face of record temperatures. Snow, ice masses in mountains are nature's freshwater reservoirs, nature's way of feeding rivers during waterless season. Reduced snow to feed the Yellow River flow will contract China's wheat harvest, the largest in the world. India's wheat harvest, second only to China's, will be affected by the flow of both the Indus and the Ganges. The shrinking of glaciers in the Himalayas could affect the water supply for hundreds of millions of people. In countries like India and China, the water hoarded during rainy season as snow and ice for discharge in the desiccated season would be reduced. There are many more mountain ranges where snow or ice regimes are changing, including the Alps and the Andes. If we continue to raise the Earth's temperature, we risk losing these reservoirs in the sky on which great cities and farmers depend. Global high temperature and melting glaciers may lead to rising seas and wash away human settlements across the world. But rising seas are not the only threat that comes with elevated global temperatures. Higher surface water temperature in the tropical ocean mean more water radiating into the atmosphere to drive tropical storm systems, leading to more frequent and more destructive storms. Cyclones and storms and erratic weather are making considerable headway all over the world in recent years. The recent trend suggests that the regions most vulnerable to more powerful storms in Asia are East and Southeast Asia, including the Philippines, Taiwan, Japan, China, and Vietnam, that are likely to bear the brunt of the powerful storms crossing the Pacific. The east coast of India are particularly exposed to severe tropical cyclonic storms that bring high tidal waves and floods in the Indian-Bangladesh Sundarbans. The same outcome may take place in cases of more intense cyclones in the densely populated regions all over the world, including New York, as we saw during the Sandy hurricane few weeks ago. Climatic changes through a long Dewey period, I'm concluding. Climatic changes through a long Dewey period and their impact on the rise or decline of civilizations are now worth looking into. Rising or falling temperatures, monsoon behavior, melting of snow on the mountains, rising sea levels, more powerful storms and cyclones may have a message to convey regarding the interactions of the humans with the natural world. In South Asia in particular, climate had been central to the growth or prosperity of human civilizations. Climate was most crucial to rice production or settled agriculture. We have the images of gods like Indra or Varuna who are supposed to be in control of rain, water, or climate. We are also aware how the change of climate and decline of monsoon in northwestern India possibly led to the fall of the Indus Valley civilization. The changes in the pattern of Indian monsoon over the past 10,000 years may explain the spread of agriculture in South Asia, as well as the rise and fall of Harappan civilization. Again, in different periods of Indian history, we have references to rulers and kings dishing out to peasants hit by severe droughts the package of exemption of land revenue. Human societies had found ways to adapt to hydrological regimes and processes in South Asia, the variabilities, scarcities, and excesses that occur over space and between seasons. In China, crop failure led to the decline of the Ming Dynasty. The 17th century crisis in China was actually an integral part of a broader global or hemispheric crisis when climatic conditions continued with other factors to spark off political upheavals across Europe and Asia. In order to understand the rise and fall of empires, historians must take into account ecological and climatic changes. Professor Laduri holds in his recent book that climate acts like a trigger for upheavals and other big events in history. This is Professor Laduri, the father of climate history. And climate, when combined with other factors, is capable of producing great turbulences in history. Ancient India made an important contribution to science. In ancient India, religion and science were linked together. Astronomy and astrology made progress because the planets came to be regarded as gods, and their movements began to be closely observed. I will argue that the study of astronomy and astrology in ancient India became imperative because of their connection with changes in seasons and weather conditions, which were necessarily for agricultural activities. To conclude, I will argue Richard Grove has already shown the connections between drought in South Asia and the institutional responses to it, and the beginnings of modern scientific understandings of climatic teleconnections between global-scale tropical circulation and the strength of the Asian monsoon. In colonial India, repeated droughts and famines sparked off institutional innovations and a famine code. It also triggered off a sharp debate about the connection between deforestation and rainfall change among the British officials. It is necessary to historicize the debate in the light of the pre-colonial traditional perceptions of climate as it existed in India and South Asia. This may not be very well documented, but one has to understand that there are scattered and indirect references to climate and rainfall, pattern of tropical monsoon, and cyclonic depressions, which are important to quantify the available water resources and their historical role in many ancient and medieval texts like the Ramayana and Mahabharata. Chinese accounts, writings of Mughal court historians, the ancient Greek sources relating to Alexander's invasion may be of some help too. Cultural representations of natural calamities or climate as found in literature or various visual arts are also worth looking into. It is high time to embark on a project of constructing a comprehensive history of water and climate in South Asia, and this will be a good message, a good tool to handle the upcoming problem of climate change. Let there be a new beginning. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Professor Judith Shapiro from American University on nature conquest in revolutionary China.
Okay, I don't know how I'm going to be able to tell you everything I want to tell you in 20 minutes. So I'm just not going to be able to tell you everything I want to tell you. But it's a real pleasure to be here. I actually taught here in '84 a course on the Cultural Revolution. Then before you guys were a gleam in your daddy's eyes in some cases, I was, I think, 14 or 15, I took a class here in dance improvisation. So this is really coming home for me. So it's great to be here. I've been asked to speak on Chinese environmental history and the lessons for today. And to do that, I'm going to draw on two books. One is my Mao's War Against Nature book, which is presumably the reason I've been asked to come here today. And yet I have a new book out, which is much more contemporary in focus, called China's Environmental Challenges. So what I'm going to try to do is cover the Mao years as best I can in 15 minutes, and then ask you guys to look at this slideshow I have about contemporary issues, and we'll have a discussion about whether the history of this region has any relevance to today's problems at all. Because there does tend to be a bit of a disconnect. You know, the Cultural Revolution is a big black hole in Chinese historical memory. There's really not a significant effort to deal with that period. And even among environmentalists, there'll be a tendency to think, well, you know, that was then and this is now. And maybe that's true, but maybe there are also linkages to be drawn. So I would argue that there's two reasons to study the Mao period and for environmentalism. And thank you, Dr. Chakraborty, for mentioning Mark Elvin and all these other folks, because Chinese environmental history is, of course, much more complex than the Mao period. And frankly, when I was working on this book, the Mao period was still considered political science. You know, but as you get older and things and the present recedes into the past, then political science becomes history. But I'm not really an historian per se, but this book is now considered environmental history. So there's two main reasons to study the Mao period for environmentalism. One is to ask this question that I just raised about whether the Mao period affects environmental performance today. And the other is to derive an understanding of the human-non-human relationship at a time when this relationship was described in a very aggressive, warlike, transparent kind of way. And it's an opportunity to think about our relationship with nature in lots of other situations. So let's say 6 special situations about the Mao period for the environment. Number 1 is the very extreme role of the state in mobilizing people to degrade the environment. So this is very James Scottish, but you know, the state was really willing to make people go here, there, and everywhere in the name of nature conquest. Number, I guess 5 I got here. Number 2 is this concept of humans and nature as adversaries. So this intensely militarized, warlike kind of language, and then a very, very clear link between the suffering of people and the suffering of nature. So as I went out and interviewed people, you know, people would say, I couldn't speak against the cutting down of the rainforest because I was in labor camp criticizing myself, you know, so, or young people were sent to the frontier areas to prepare for war, prepare for famine, reform themselves, and also fill in the wetlands or something like that. So you get this kind of reforming yourself and reforming nature happening together. Another special element is the importance of the responsibility of Mao himself, okay? When I went into the research for this book, I thought I might find out that Mao was not critical, but over and over again, Mao said something at a key point, like Mao said, with many people, strength is great. And that made the population go up at a very bad moment for the environment. So as a soldier, you know, Mao didn't understand development very well. He thought that a big army was a good thing. So people often say, you know, 70% good, 30% bad, or maybe 30% good, 70% bad. But in any case, it was Mao's fault. I don't mind saying. So another is this voluntaristic notion that with people's thought, you could contravene the laws of science. Okay? So the laws of science, we talked about yesterday, I think Liu Zhi made the point that a lot of things in China are done in the name of science that are not very positive. Well, during the Mao period, it was like Maoist thought is more powerful than science. So if you say, for example, rubber can't be grown in Sichuan-Banna, well, that's not what Maoism says, so we're going to grow rubber in Sichuan-Banna, even though it will mean that the rubber will keep freezing to death every once in a while. So that was a dramatic kind of a thing. So this militarized language, winning the war between man and grasslands, sowing wheat by shock attack, making mountains bow their heads, making the rivers flow uphill. I'm going to read you a poem. Ta-da. To get you the flavor of the period. Let's attack here. Drive away the mountain gods. Break down the stone walls and bring out those 200 million tons of coal. Let's strike here. Let the Dragon King change his job. Let the river climb the hills. Let us ask it for 8,000 mu of rice paddies. Let the valley open its bosom to yield 500 jin of oats every year. Cut down the hill to make a plain over there. Let's wage war against the great earth. Let the mountains and rivers surrender under our feet. March on nature. Take over the power of wind and rain. We shall not tolerate a single inch of unused land. Make wet rice, wheat, and yellow corn grow on top of the mountain, and beans, peanuts, and red gaoliang rise on sheer rocks. Okay, well, it wasn't just them, right? I mean, the Army Corps of Engineers straightened out the Mississippi and told it to become more rational. So this is not just a Maoist thing, but we can see with the transparency of this kind of discourse what happens when people think that they can conquer nature. Now, I normally, if I had an hour, would talk about four sort of cases of the Mao period. One is sort of going through chronologically, starting with the anti-rightist movement when Ma Ying-jeou warned that the population was getting too big, and they told him that he should shut up for the rest of his life. And also Huang Wanli, who warned about a dam being built on the Yellow River, and again, they made him shut up for the rest of his life. I got to interview him before he died. The core theme that I would pull out from the anti-rightist movement is the theme of political repression. And I want you to remember the four themes I'm going to go over, because then when we think about today's China, we can say, well, are these themes still around? So political repression on environmental issues, I think it's still around. Yes. Okay. Then with the Great Leap Forward, the utopian urgency to catch up with Britain in the production of steel and cut down the forests to make all kinds of backyard furnaces, this kind of hurry, 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 that kind of spirit. I would say that the hurry, hurry, hurry spirit is still alive in China. We just had a terrible train accident outside of Shanghai, and if you read the blogs, I didn't do it personally, but I read other people who read the blogs, and they said, China, slow down. What are we doing going so fast? This sense of change too fast is arguably, I mean, China has changed in the last 20 years more than any country on the earth has ever. Sometimes you look at an old person in China and you think what they've been through in the course of their lifetime. How can they possibly deal with that level of change? The third element I would signal is the dogmatic formalism. Again, Liu Zhi mentioned this yesterday with respect to the ecological migration policy, the notion that one size fits all. In the Mao period, this was expressed during the campaign to learn from Dazhai. So everybody all over the country had to build terraces, even though maybe your place wasn't suitable for building terraces, or I think you saw in the poem, let's cut down the hill and make a plain here. Well, I also heard that in some places there was a plain, they built a hill so they could put terraces there, just in order to, I don't know how true that is, but just in order to learn from Dazhai like they were supposed to. Finally, I would signal, I've already mentioned this, the forcible relocations. with respect to the educated youth movement and also the so-called Third Front movement, where they moved factories to the interior in order to shelter them from bombs from the Soviet Union, which they thought were coming. And that was very bad for the environment because it was a bad place to put factories inside of these valleys. And the educated youth, thank you, the educated youth filling in wetlands, cutting down rainforests, had a long-term negative effect on the environment. So one legacy of the Mao period for environmental protection is this sort of crisis of belief, cynicism, mistrust of public goals like environmental protection, problems with enforcement of law because people don't believe in the government, problems with paper parks, the melamine scandal, if you've heard about that. And basically the government has lost legitimacy as far as enforcement of a lot of laws. But also I think we still see these four dynamics alive: political repression of environmental activists, urgency to get rich quick, the top-down formalism, and the forcible relocations, all of which are happening a lot with the dams, the forcible relocations for dams, the forcible relocation for the so-called South-North water transfer scheme is still very, very common. So what are the implications of this? The implications are if we turn all these sort of negative forces around, well, we need political participation and intellectual freedom. We need moderation to go a little slower to allow the environment to adapt and respond. We need subsidiarity and respect for local conditions, respect for local wisdom. And we also need reverence for the land through long-term connection with the land. And none of those things are going to be enough, but they are really important. So what does this have to do with today? Let's move to the slideshow. I love my little slideshow. Okay. So the themes I found for studying China today end up being themes about rapid transformation. I mean, what does this have to do with the Mao period? How do I make this go? I'm not good at this. Is there let's see. I guess I could just keep sliding down. Yeah, I want to just go boom, 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 boom.
From the beginning, and then you can go next.
Okay, so boom, 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 boom. Okay, so New China, consumer culture, consumption. We started talking about this with Black Friday yesterday. Actually, that was a great question. So we got Black Friday every day in China. This consumption is actually replacing the government legitimacy. The government is legitimate only to the extent that it can keep people consuming. The population graph, okay, we see here, this is a definite residue of the Mao period. The Chinese will always say, oh, if only Mao hadn't done this, then we wouldn't have the environmental problems we have today. Lots of people here. Too many people. I always tell audiences who are worried about forcible abortions that they should go to China during rush hour, and then they might, I mean, not that forcible abortions are good, but we really have a sense of the need to control population. China becoming the manufacturing breadbasket of the world. A huge theme for us today is a global political economy of what's going on in China. So to what extent is China to blame for its huge environmental problems, and to what extent are we to blame as consumers of China's Barbie dolls and so on and so forth? More consumption. Unbelievable. I could not have imagined a scene like this when I lived in China in the early 80s. It was absolutely impossible to dream of. Okay, what is this about, you know? In the street, some lady came up to me and said, how good a brand is Malika? And I'm thinking, what's Malika? Malika, I have no idea. Turned out Mary Kay, she had just signed on to be a Mary Kay saleswoman, and she wanted to make sure that the brand status was high enough. You know, Prada, those luxury goods are really, China's market is saving the luxury good market. Again, unbelievable to me, just even a few decades ago. Traffic problem. Yeah, when I was first in China, there were only 5 cars on the campus. You had to be a big fat cadre to ride in one. Yeah, that's it. Now everybody's got a car. Okay, some of the images of the horrible pollution, which, you know, bad as the environmental degradation was in the Mao period, it's nothing compared to what we're seeing here. Water pollution, air pollution. Some of these pictures are really moving. then the problem of climate change and China overtaking the U.S. in terms of CO2 emissions, and even on a per capita basis, it's starting to be really quite significant, so that it's harder and harder for China to argue that they're a developing country. And in fact, the World Bank stopped calling China a developing country a long time ago. The glacier melts, which so many of us have already mentioned, and the dramatic effect that's going to have on China's water table. Desertification. I love this slide just because we were talking about it last night. This is the standing committee. You can see they're standing. But I like this slide just to think about, the governance problems and the fact that the government is really, unlike during the Mao period, the Chinese government is giving tremendous weight to the challenges of sustainability, but there's also a tremendous need to keep the economy growing quickly. Otherwise, as I said before, their legitimacy is at stake. Here's the environmental protection, which has become a ministry, but it's really a weak ministry. So on the one hand, it's great that it's gotten higher, but compared with other ministries, it's not strong enough. So there's interesting linkages with civil society. Okay, development of electric vehicles, huge progress in wind turbines, solar panels. As you know, there's lots of disputes in front of the WTO right now. So then there's a section here on sort of national identity and this sort of superiority-inferiority complex and the role of Mao even today. Here's an image from the Dalian Gangtie, the backyard furnaces movement. This is relevant to the Mao period. And then we can talk, we don't have time to talk, but the role of Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism as potential inspirations for sustainability. It's not a very active debate in China now, but it could become one. Then the whole question of civil society. So many exciting things are happening in terms of civil society, and people like Li Bo and Li Zhi are experts in this. This is the founder of Ziran Zhiyo, Friends of Nature. He recently passed away. Wonderful man. Here's a map of China's cancer villages, so the importance of information transparency, the fact that this kind of thing is available on the web is a tremendous tool. Working with non-governmental organizations globally to basically to hold China accountable to the treaties that it's signed, such as the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. This kind of naming and shaming in public, this is amazing that Greenpeace was able to do this. Again, 20 years ago, unimaginable that they could conduct this kind of public protest. This is my former student who has been involved with Greenpeace taking secret water samples, and now they have a Zara campaign. Just yesterday or the day before, Zara admitted that they would detox. They said they would stop putting poison in the waterways, and this is because Greenpeace took these illegal samples and sent them to the UK, and this is just very, very exciting. Here are some pictures of protests. Maybe it's a NIMBYism question, the middle class saying we don't want these PX plants. Maybe where will these polluting plants go? But the fact that we can have these kinds of protests at all is amazing. Anti-incinerator protest. And solar panels are very toxic to manufacture, the solar panel protest. Here again in the heart of China, you can see in Tiananmen Square how incredibly polluted Beijing is. Then we get to this question of displacement of environmental harm. And this is a map of the landfills, which are all moving from the city proper of Beijing into the rural areas. Here are some very vulnerable people from the floating population that comes from rural areas to the cities to work. Here's a very famous picture of a migrant worker. None of these are my photos, by the way. And then we get to this question of China's displacement of environmental harm into ethnic minority areas. Here's the beautiful Mongolian grasslands. Here's the not so beautiful Mongolian coal mine. Huge conflicts there. Here's the once beautiful Tibetan monastery And of course, the railroad being built to Tibet is really bad. Okay, and then we go to the global implications. Here's some nice people in Pennsylvania doing some e-cycling, not realizing that there's a lot of holes in the law. And so where does it end up? Here we are, Guiyu in southern China, the famous pictures to think about that. So China is, at the one hand, an importer of environmental harm, but it's also an exporter of environmental harm. So here's Cambodia being deforested after the 2008 logging ban. As soon as China's logging ban went into place, immediately deforestation went way up in Southeast Asia, Indonesia, and eastern Russia. Here, unusually, the Burmese people are fighting against a dam and succeeded in getting the government to stop a dam. So very, very unusual. I'm glad that Dr. Chakrabarty talked about the tension between India and China over these dams. I think last night we thought too easily that there's going to be all this cooperation between India and China. But of course, whoever controls the headwaters controls the power. And there's tremendous uneasiness downstream of the Himalaya, the Tibetan Plateau. There's a book, maybe it's a little sensationalistic, but Chelany's book, Asia's Water Wars, you know, the whole discussion of will there be a war over water is very much alive again after people talking about, oh, look, people, India, Pakistan cooperated over the Indus. Almost finished here. Even in developed countries, Australia, well, Mount Whaleback Iron Mine used to be a mountain, now it's a pit. A lot of anxiety about whether China is actually buying Australia. And then finally, China's pursuit of oil in Latin America and Africa, again, a huge topic for us. So since I don't have time to answer the question about the relevance of the Mao period for all these new themes, I will come to my last and very famous slide, favorite. I love this slide. Okay, that's it. We'll
Okay, Professor Donald Hughes from University of Denver on environmental history in China and India.
Well, environmental history is often called a new field, and it is. Although the American Society for Environmental History and its journal are 45 years old, in China and India it is genuinely new, having started as a recognized academic subject in the 1990s. It's necessary to begin with the definition of environmental history so we'll know what we're talking about. I hesitate because each Chinese and Indian environmental historian offers his or her own careful definition, and their insights cannot be ignored. But I will also give my own. Environmental history is the study of the evolution of the human relationship to nature. As a subject, environmental history is concerned with how human societies have interacted with the natural environment through time. As a method, it expands historical method by using ecological analysis as a means of understanding human history. Environmental historians recognize the ways in which the living and non-living systems of the earth have influenced the course of human affairs. They also describe the changes caused by human agency in the natural environment and evaluate ideas of humans about the aspects of the world that are called nature. While there are earlier writings that fulfill this definition, environmental history as a self-conscious academic discipline under that rubric began in the United States in the 1960s and continues to flourish there. European scholars soon began an effort in the field, perhaps emphasizing the scientific aspects more than the humanistic approach that was typical in America. Environmental history found fertile ground outside Europe and the US and has at present a rapidly growing literature in several major parts of the academic world. India was the first major so-called so-called non-Western scholarly culture where environmental history found a congenial home and an independent academic impetus. Certain themes found particular emphasis due to their importance in the subcontinent, including forests and water use, among others. The period of the British Raj received great attention in the literature from the beginning. Aided by the voluminous body of sources preserved, post-independence developments have an increasing place, while less work is being done on periods before the 19th century. Conferences and academic programs have enlivened the field, but more cooperative organization among environmental historians of South Asia remains to be done. South Asia has a strong tradition of academic history, and environmental history there is allied with ecology and history of science. The number, quality, and productivity of environmental historians of South Asia remains to be done. I'm sorry. The number, quality, and productivity of environmental historians in India is truly impressive. Among the first environmental historians to gain a wide international scholarly audience was Ramachandra Guha, whose book on the Chipko Andolan movement appeared in 1989. In a 2-year residence at Yale, he gained familiarity with the U.S. environmental movement and its spokespersons, including leading environmental historians. He evaluated the difference between American and Indian thought on these subjects and was highly critical of a biocentric thought in the U.S., the emphasis on wilderness protection and the deep ecology strain advocated by the Californians George Sessions and Bill Duvall with their Norwegian forebear Arne Næss. To Guha, American environmentalism sought amenities for a prosperous middle class that could afford public protection of large natural reserves. In contrast, he pointed out that in South Asia, natural areas are the homes and critical resources of local people, many of them impoverished. Ecology there must take account of human needs and social justice. Colonial regimes and their successors after independence have forced inappropriate Western programs of forestry and conservation upon people and ecosystems to which they have very often proved destructive. Guha advocates the principle of community forestry, where people participate in the planning and use of local resources. He and co-author Madhav Gadgil, an ecologist of the Indian Institute of Science, produced This Fissured Land, an ecological history of India in 1992. Its argument centered in India, but with worldwide methodological implications, analyzes the interaction between social relations and environmental conditions. It should be noted that American environmental historical thought has moved strongly in the direction of Guha's anthropocentric concern in the following 2 decades. Gadgil has taken part in commissions reviewing India's forest policy and planning for the future development of the Western Ghats. Subhash Chandran, an ecologist, has studied ancient sacred groves that survive today, protected by villagers. Chandran's studies, some written with Madhav Gadgil, with a historical dimension, indicate the importance of traditional community reserves in preserving biodiversity and unique ecosystems such as the Myristica swamps. Chandra has also written about the changes in Hindu practice as they have affected environmental preservation. Rana P.B. Singh of the National Geographical Society of India is a historical geographer who specializes in landscape and sacred topography, particularly the area of Benares, the most important pilgrimage center of Hinduism. The History of Science Division of NISTADS, the National Institute of Science, Technology, and Development Studies, New Delhi, sponsored an impressive series of publications and conferences forwarded by the distinguished historian of science, Deepak Kumar, Jawaharlal Nehru University, and Satpal Sangwan. A collection of important papers from these conferences appeared as Nature and the Orient, edited by Richard Grove, Vinita Damodaran, and Satpal Sangwan. Due to historical experience of the subcontinent, particularly during the period of British rule, environmental history in India emphasizes forest history. Ravi Rajan has written a book on forestry during the British imperial period. A.J. Rawat of Kumaon University, Nainital, chronicled the deforestation of the Himalaya and its effects on local people, especially women and tribals, and has edited valuable collections on the history of forestry. The interaction between cattle grazing, forestry, colonial masters, and local people in central India in the 19th century is a subject of ecology, colonialism, and cattle, an excellent historical study by Laxman D. Satya. Mahesh Rangarajan has an impressive publication record as author and editor, emphasizing the politics and history of wildlife conservation, forest rights, and environmental history. One of his recent books is Ecology as If Nature Existed, an implied rejoinder to the postmodern contention that nature is nothing but a human social construction. His recent collection, India's Environmental History, is comprehensive. The formation of the Association of South Asian Environmental Historians is an important step in the organization of the discipline and provision for exchange between scholars studying South Asia, inclusive of those with locations outside the region. The executive director is Ranjan Chakrabarty, and I don't need to show you a picture of him because we have the man himself here. He's built an impressive environmental history program at Jadavpur University in Kolkata and is, of course, Vice Chancellor of Vidyasagar University in West Bengal. His own publications include Does Environmental History Matter? And Situating Environmental History, 2007. Include reflections on the theory and method of the subject. He answers the question of the former title, Does Environmental History Matter?, in the conclusion of a well-reasoned introduction. Environmental history will continue to thrive because the seeds of a new social and cultural history are firmly embedded in it. Environmental history, therefore, does matter. Chinese scholars turned to environmental history later, but the field has seen a spectacular growth. Initially, they were hampered by the fact that few outside historians could read their papers and books, and that exchange was discouraged before the more recent open-door policy by the government allowed translation of the most important outside environmental history literature into Chinese, with some exceptions. Now, Several universities have faculty and programs devoted to environmental history, and a number of journals have opened their pages to articles on the subject. Environmental history and world history are cooperating, as they do at Capital Normal University in Beijing. The best introduction to environmental history in China is a 2004 article by Bao Maohong of Peking University with that very title, including extensive references to works by Chinese scholars in Chinese. Among the subjects of investigation mentioned by Bao are environmental protection, water control, urban environmental history, climate, population, and the history of famine and forest history. The subdiscipline of environmental history emerged there only in the late 1990s and early 21st century, as Bao indicates. He wrote some of the earliest articles within the discipline, including the history, theory, and methods of environmental history studies from other countries, but also offered his own interpretation of environmental history and the promising idea of forwarding a Chinese school of environmental history. He trusts that environmental history studies have an unlimited prospect and will develop well because they meet the needs of social development and are also connected with the mainstream of international academic development. An international symposium on environment and society in Chinese history, organized by Wang Lihua, was held at Nankai University, Tianjin, in 2005. Mei Shuichen created a thriving environmental history program for undergraduates and graduates at the School of History at Beijing Normal University. Her students are teaching and doing research at many universities in China. Her thoughtful article, From the History of the Environment to Environmental History, examines the nature of environmental history and insists that it is not the history of the environment per se, nor the environment within the scope of history of society studies, but the historical study of the interactions between humans and the environment. As a corollary, she maintains, the realization of harmony between humans and nature must begin with the improvement of social relations among people. Peace between humans and nature depends on peace among humans. An association of environmental historians of East Asia has begun a series of conferences, including non-Chinese historians of China. The first meeting was held at the Academia Sinica in Taipei in 2011 with the able chairmanship of Zhuizheng Liu. With Mark Elvin, she also edited an excellent collection, Sediments of Time. The second meeting will be held in 2013 at the Donghua University in Taiwan. Mingfeng Xia founded the Center for Ecological History, Renmin University of China in 2012, and serves as its director. A leading American environmental historian, Donald Worster, presently serves as distinguished foreign expert there. There are environmental history programs in other institutions in the provinces of China, so that projects in ecologically distinct regions are possible. The thrust of environmental history in both India and China is linked to the growth of environmental concern about problems that are increasingly serious. Urban environmental pollution became palpable. Air quality declined to the point that air was unbreathable, and people had to wear filter masks. Farmland was improperly cultivated. Pasture was overgrazed, and forest, grasslands, and vegetation were destroyed. The problem of water supply and the development was critical in both nations. Toxic environmental accidents and disasters such as the horrendous Bhopal incident of 1984 emerged as a series of blows, including frequent dust bowls and the great floods of 1998 and so forth in China. People turn to researchers to answer questions. What are the causes of these environmental disasters? How often have similar events occurred in the past? Should we expect them in the future? And are there ways of ameliorating them? Environmental history may not have the answers to all of these questions, but it is an important way of accessing human experience and provides needed depth and perspective, as May Schweichen expressed it. Studies in environmental history can become a path for people understanding environmental issues and a way of refuting improper arguments relating to environmental issues, and a channel of increasing environmental consciousness. The rest of the world as well needs to learn from the experience of India and China. And I believe I made the time limit, didn't I? Thank you very much.